everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to talk about the last Fed meeting of 2025. Before we dive in, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Trust and Will, for making this episode possible. Logan, welcome back to the podcast on this Fed day.
Wow. You know what? This was a very interesting Fed meeting. They sounded a little bit confused with the economic message because, on our last podcast, we talked about, there's a backdrop for growth for next year, and the Fed raised its growth projections. But, the unemployment rate, they kind of didn't say it was going to tick down, and, maybe one cut next year. There was a lot of mixed messages. The bond yields were rising while the Q&A was going. We were getting to that key level, or, we don't want to close really above 418 and have bonds sell off after that. And then Powell dropped the gauntlet. He finally said it, Sarah Wheeler. He said, homies, Logan was right all along.
He didn't.
It was labor over inflation, man. We were just so behind the curve that we think the jobs data is negative.
That's what he said.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. In 2024, my job forecasts were so much lower than what the numbers were printing. But after the revisions, it looked basically right to me because I always adjust to population growth and then, where I think we can be. But this year, as soon as the year started, things just looked weak. And it's never good when manufacturing jobs and construction jobs are being lost at the same time. I don't care what people say about population growth. That's never a good sign. But in any case, the 10-year yield, correctly so, went lower this year. Went after Godzilla tariffs, that drama went lower in a more disciplined fashion. And we got down here, and I wonder if Powell thinks he made a mistake by sounding hawkish the time before. Because for him to basically say, we think the jobs data is negative, right? That's not population growth, right? Negative is negative, right? So when after that, the 10-year yield fell, and he also made a statement. We don't think there's any case for us to raise rates or anything like that. We believe the growth rate of inflation will fall next year as tariffs pass through. We get service disinflation, especially from rents coming in. But the unemployment rate will stay the same. So there's a lot of mixed messages, but I just leave off, finally at December, the whole labor over inflation model was finally completed with the last Fed meeting, and the 10-year yield fell. And we're basically at levels where, it's, again, even with jobs being lost, Sarah, they are still, now they've taken away the modestly restrictive stance. We are kind of upper levels of being neutral. So neutral to me looks really about 3 or 3.25. So you have technically only 2 more rate cuts in the system under this kind of Fed camp. And we're here, right? And that's kind of, it looks, when I take it all together, everything looks about right with the labor market deteriorating, even though the growth rate of inflation picked up this year.
So huge sigh of relief. Right, from the mortgage industry, not just because rates are not going up based on what Powell said.
Well, I mean, initially, some people thought it was very hawkish and bond yields were rising. And then when Powell admitted that they believe the labor data is negative, it just shows that Powell, Goolsbee, Beth Hammack should be fired right now from the Cleveland Fed. Lori Logan, Schmidt, the other Fed president, the Atlanta Fed is going to leave. So Bostic, we don't care about. He's going to retire. There was all these people who basically simply ignored the labor data and were just making up population growth excuses, even though the aggregate labor sectors were deteriorating, which if you tie it up to every economic cycle post-World War II, it would mean the labor market is deteriorating. Well, finally, at least we got that. So it, didn't let the 10-year yield. So now that we're in December, we did not get what we saw last year, because last year the labor data wasn't deteriorating like this. It was just getting back to normal. And then, of course, November and December, on average, we're averaging over 262,000 jobs per month. Now it's like, okay, the last 4 months were 30, 40,000, but we think they're negative. out there. So we think there's a 60,000 negative revision trend. So there you go. And really, to be honest with you, the only reason rates are even down here is because we have those reports that are not even updated at all whatsoever. So I think that was maybe Powell's kind of giving something to the marketplace on that, and I think that was the right call to basically admit, hey, listen, kind of missed this, and the unemployment rate's rising. And last year they said the unemployment rate, if it gets above 4.3%, we would consider that deterioration. So you put them all together, it makes sense to where we are right now.
So from your perspective, was he looking at the labor data that we've all been looking at and has just come to the conclusion that you've said?
They completely blew it.
No, but my question is, is he coming to this conclusion now because he got more data? What do you
No,
think?
they don't have any data. They're just taking the negative revision trends. See, this is what Christopher Waller was saying. Christopher Waller, who should be the next Fed chairman. Christopher Waller, who is Team Logan. By the way, homie said, hey, listen, the labor market's deteriorating. The housing market's deteriorating. There's the revisions are coming quite negative. These are things that usually happen in a late cycle or in a labor market that's deteriorating. Waller was ahead of every single Federal Reserve. They should all give Waller like a really good Christmas present, because what if he wasn't there? Then the whole Federal Reserve team would look, out of Sarah, you know what they would look like?
Old and slow.
They would look old and slow. So, I mean, it's good that there was conflict, but we still had people. We had Goolsbee should be fired, dissenting, out here. So again, to me, it was a very sophisticated Fed meeting. Like, you really have to be nerdy to read the lines, but it literally the whole thing turned on a dime when Powell basically admitted that, we probably had negative jobs reports. And even with negative jobs reports, they are still modestly restrictive or the upper ends of neutral. There's no discussion about an accommodative stance. They have chef's kiss Sarah Wheeler since 2022. They have followed the model of this Federal Reserve since they changed their game plan. Why? Because it was late 2022 that someone spiked the Fed's eggnog. And we still haven't found that criminal, but whoever that person is needs to be found. There needs to be an award from him, right? That changed the whole game plan, and they literally stayed with it all the way up to near Christmas 2025, which is quite remarkable, but they did. They kept it going throughout this period.
Okay, so one of the next jobs report comes out when? Tomorrow? The next day?
December 16th, I think.
Okay, so next week. Comes out next week. They deliberately put it after this meeting. Any chance that you see that report comes out and mortgage rates go higher as a result?
I mean, if Powell is telling people that they're probably going to be negative, I think a lot of that is priced in. I think that's one of the reasons why the 10-year yield went lower. But let's just kind of remember the last few months, the 10-year yield has been kind of 395, 420, 395, 420. Mortgage rates have been kind of in that range. Why? Slow dance, Sarah Wheeler. Right. Oh yeah, a little Usher, a little Shy, a little Jodeci. That slow dance has been right here, and it makes sense with the data, because remember, the Fed is still modestly restrictive or upper ends of neutral, however you want to look at it right now at this point. And we're just slowly, I mean, if they stick to the game plan, they are slowly moving to neutral policy, which is 3 or 3.25. So in theory, there's only 1 or 2 more rate cuts left in this cycle until the labor market breaks. But labor market, they kind of said jobless claims, man. They're like, the jobless claims data, it hasn't taken off yet. So that's kind of a little puzzling, but that's what we're looking at. So this is the 4th time in the last few years they've talked about jobless claims is really what they track.
So this is, again, I'm going to say it's positive news as far as I'm concerned, because last year it took all the way till September for them to do a rate cut, and then rates went higher. Mortgage rates went higher after they cut the Fed funds rate. And you've made the case that, like, we have not been able to keep mortgage rates down towards 6% for long enough to make some inroads. So now, okay, we have another Fed rate cut. Doesn't look like rates are going to go up as a result. That's good.
Yeah, it's good. It's good for the reason that you don't want to see the labor market deteriorating for it. But there were signs there, Sarah. There were signs there. Waller saw it. I saw it. Other people saw it. Softening labor market with staying modestly restrictive is a policy choice. And then Powell said some strange things about the housing market, which again to me they are not authentic housing people, right? They're just kind of in the background watching the stuff, but uh, it is noticing that this has occurred. The last Fed meeting of the year, they finally just said, "Hey, we throw up, give it up. We're labor over inflation, right? The labor market's deteriorating. It's negative. Negative is not something we're okay with."
Okay, given everything you heard today, where do you think rates are going in the future?
It all depends on the labor market. It all depends on jobless claims. So much is already priced in to mortgage rates with neutral policy. Just to give everyone an idea, in the early part of the century, mortgage rates got to like 5.25%, but the Fed funds rate was below 2%. We were getting out of the tech recession then. The Fed funds rate neutral policy is already pricing in like 3% or 3.25% Fed funds rate. So we're at the lower part of the forecast because it's really hard to get that next leg through unless the labor market breaks. And this is why I've always said I cannot really get below 5.75% mortgage rates with neutral policy. The spreads could get better, and then you could get some softness, but they need to lose this stance if you want to go much lower below that. So it's jobless claims, right? He basically came out there and said jobless claims is what we really track, and it hasn't broken yet. So we keep an eye on that going out in the future. But again, this was it. This was Powell's real last Fed meeting. Next is going to be Hassett. I know Hassett was making some statements that we can cut 50. He was right before the Fed meeting. So they're kind of coordinating out here, but once the next Fed chairman is picked, and once that'll happen in May when Powell leaves, we'll have a whole different ball game. But if it is Hassett, we're going to have to take his verbiage with a little bit more credence in terms of how we think the future guidance is going to be. But that there's a whole bit of drama when that occurs because clearly there's some dissenting views out here.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about purchase apps, which we got today as well.
Purchase apps down 2% week to week, still up 19% year over year. The comps are harder, right? I was not expecting, high double digits or single teens with the year over year data. So again, it's been the best 18 weeks of the year. And same model as always. When mortgage rates go below 6.64 and head towards 6, the forward-looking demand gets better. And as long as there's duration out there, and the next positive week to week will give us that 12 weeks. Imagine that for a year. Just imagine that we've now had this happen a few times in the last 2 years. We just never been able to hold it down here. Imagine just holding it down here for a year with everything we know. You could get a little bit more traction, right? That's one of the things I've always tried to say when I go on TV and talk on the door. You could get traction, but you can't get traction if you just go shoot right back up to 7%. So I think it was good. I think one of the things that I did like about this is that they raised their growth targets for next year, and they were just very adamant about there's going to be no hikes. Whatever you think about inflation, they were really saying there's going to be some disinflation from productivity and service inflation, that tariffs are going to be a one-off. So I think that one of the more positive things is that there's nothing about rate hikes or anything like that. So in that sense, it makes everything much more interesting in 2026. But labor data drove this. Labor data is going to be the driver in 2026. And we'll take it from there, but we're going to have a whole brand new ball game in 2026 with not only just with Powell's replacement, but also Fed governors. Clearly, there are going to be Fed governors targeted next year for firing if Trump could do that, or some kind of rule to make it the job hideous for them to leave. Bostic's gone. Colger's gone to who I don't. Lisa Cook's a Dove, so she wouldn't really matter so much. But I could see Trump just going after Fed governors next year now with a little bit more aggressive take.
Well, you know what? It ended up couldn't be better than for your model. And you were like, hopefully Powell doesn't turn hawkish at this point, and he didn't.
No, he had the opportunity. It was sounding a little bit hawkish, but I think a lot of people are just shocked. I mean, as a Fed chairman to come after the fact and say, "Well, we think the jobs data was negative,"
Oof.
and negative is just, and there are a lot of us. The labor market's deteriorating. It's not breaking, but it's not, So, and you still had dissents. So clearly, there's people that are, okay that they were wrong this whole time. Because there's one thing about population growth and jobs being created, but there's another thing about negative. And again, it's just never a good thing when you have manufacturing and construction jobs being lost. That's just the way it is.
Excellent. Well, Logan, a good result from this Fed meeting. Hopefully that holds. Thank you so much for being on, and we will talk to you again soon.
Pleasure.